Hello, everyone. Welcome. I think people will still be joining for another, but we only have got the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. So, just as we normally would, let's just take a moment to bring some awareness to the breath, just to kind of give ourselves a pause, a little bit of a break, to kind of transition into the class. So, just sit comfortably with an upright spine and just start to focus your awareness on the physical sensation of the breath as it passes into and back out of the tip of the nostrils, just trying to let go of anything other than that sensation, anything grabbing your attention in your space or thoughts of the past or future. Try to again and again come back to that physical sensation, gently removing your awareness from anything other than that that might rise in the mind. Trying to not experience judgment or frustration, just lifting your attention and placing it back on the physical sensation. And then try to connect just in whatever way you can with a broad, virtuous motivation for your time, thinking about whatever skills or habits that you're trying to cultivate, and how that cultivation will not only be of benefit to yourself, but also be of benefit to others. And thinking that it's also for their benefit that we are here. All right. So, welcome back. We'll get started. So, if anyone is here for the first time, the previous classes in this series are on our, or not on our, but on Tibetan Norbu YouTube channel. I'm in Virginia, but it's on their YouTube channel for the past. This is class 6 of 8, so but totally fine. So people, we are without a moderator at least at the moment. So People, I don't know if people want to pin my video or however that might work. I can't spotlight it, but people might want to pin it so that they can follow the presentation, what have you. So throughout this class, we've been looking at a variety of things, and all related to, of course, this idea of attachment, this idea of the ways in which we are prone to making exaggerations when we observe things that our history and our experiences have led us to judge certain things as pleasant or unpleasant. We then feel very strongly about wanting to never be separated from what's pleasant and always to be separated from what is unpleasant, and how the mind lacks a certain spaciousness because of that preoccupation. That's kind of the main theme of the course. And one of the really, I think, useful and hopeful messages in Buddhist thinking is that whenever Buddhist thinking presents something that is, kind of highlights something for us to think about, it will always give us antidotes. It will always give us ways of skillfully, constructively working with that thing that it's telling us we should maybe think about. And maybe this is maybe getting us into trouble, but here are things that we can do. Here are antidotes. Here are ways, constructive ways of thinking. Buddhism never says, here's a problem and we're just stuck with it. This is just the way things are. So really sorry, but you're just going to have to deal with that. It always is helpful in that it presents us with really constructive solutions. And we've looked throughout this course, in the previous classes, we've tried to highlight a variety of what those are. And really, that's what we're going to focus still on today. And I did mention last time that there were these two things that I was trying to cover. And really, I managed to cover one of them, but then the other, we did kind of run out of time on. So that's what we're going to pick up today, is the idea, and what I said was the idea of motivation. And this, in a way, really is the ultimately, in one way of thinking, is really the whole point. Really does get at the real heart of what Lama Yeshe, in When the Chocolate Runs Out, the kind of the material for the course, in one way of thinking, what we're going to really start looking at is the fundamental, the most direct, the most comprehensive way of constructively dealing with this tendency that we have that's getting us into trouble. Because as has come up throughout the course, this more problematic tendency is rooted in the view that what happens to me and what my preferences are the things that are of paramount, overriding, uh, kind of almost narcissistic is a maybe an aggressive word, but kind of where the I and the views of the I are of an overriding precedence in our experience. So the degree to which we are successful in working directly with that underlying view will really be the extent to which we can work with this problematic energy of I can't tolerate things that I feel are unpleasant, and I also can't tolerate being separated from what I do think is pleasant. So, the first thing that we're going to look at with this is all of these are direct quotes from the book, but this is a little bit longer. This is the contemplation that Lama Yeshe, and it's really one of the most, I think, one of the most beautiful statements in a lot of the books that Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa have that have been created from their teachings. This particular, for my mind, it's really lovely. So I want to have us look at that. So, and again, in full screen, a lot of these slides display better. So he says he recommends or suggests that we can start to think about this sort of contemplation. He says, for the rest of my life, it is my responsibility to grow in mindfulness and happiness. Each day, I will expand the loving kindness I already have, and each morning I will open my wisdom eye to see more and more clearly into the inner universal reality. Take responsibility for my life and dedicate it to others by growing strong in loving kindness and wisdom. I will serve others as much as possible. And then that second line is also from the book. I'm not saying to make that determination. That's in the book. He's also suggesting that if we're really serious about being, going inward and looking at the mental states that cause us to suffer and cause us to create suffering for others, then to take that seriously and to work with it in a lasting, really genuine way, we've talked about a whole variety of antidotes and things. So, and so I won't rehash all of that. But what we're moving into now is really trying to think about what is the purpose of my life, um, and not some sort of like a priori purpose that that there is like a purpose that is given to us, but for myself, what is my purpose for my life? What am I choosing as my purpose for my life? Buddhism would say that that's up to us to think about, and it's up to us to establish and create a purpose for our lives. And so if we think about this self preoccupation that is focused on bringing pleasant things into our experience and pushing out unpleasant things from our experience, that Buddhist thinking would suggest that that tendency and that habit is kind of the path of least resistance that we have cultivated, you know, continuously in this life. And Buddhist thinking, historical Buddhist thinking would go so far as to say that we've been cultivating that for much longer, lifetime after lifetime. The sort of path of least resistance is this pushing and pulling and viewing our likes and our dislikes and our preferences as the most important thing that there has ever been and that there will ever be. But he recommends that if we can start every day, if we can start thinking about this kind of aspiration, this kind of purpose, then naturally, and that's what, and we've been talking about meditation and analytical meditation and the whole underpinning the whole kind of root purpose of that is the idea that when we become familiar with new things, different things, we become different. That what we are now is a reflection of that with which we are the most familiar. And when we intentionally create new familiarities, we become different. And so, what he's, and it's really important here, this idea of expanding the loving kindness I already have. So we've talked about before, how what Lama Yeshe is saying again and again is that we already have the seeds, the roots of our ability to grow and develop. If we've ever felt loving kindness for any sentient being, we have the root and the seed to grow that, um, to expand that, to be able to apply that in a limitless way over time, and dedicate that and make that, um, to fan that flame or to water that seed or whatever analogy you want to use. We can take what is present in the mind and through intentional reflection and contemplation, we are in a really unique place to be able to expand that and to take advantage of being, having this incredible opportunity to do that. And so that's sort of, this is what we're now going to be looking at. Um, but any thoughts or questions, either maybe from last week or just if anyone is, um, confused or had a question so far?
Well, I would be curious how the notion of ahimsa or doing no harm plays into this, because this is something I've been exploring as a new vegan advocate and mentor.
So, I mean, I think there's a variety of different levels, to mental training, inner development. His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, of course, and I think I think the root of Buddhism is, you know, if the best we can do, of course, the least we should be trying to do is to not cause harm, as you're saying, to live a life of non-harmfulness. That's certainly the root of like the lay vows to avoid killing, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, and taking intoxicants or becoming intoxicated, or however people relate to that in different ways depending on different things. But that the more historical presentation really is to perhaps try to really even just avoid intoxicants. But that's for a person who's taken refuge vows, lay vows. So the foundation of Buddhist ethics is absolutely one of living a life of non-harmfulness. Uh, and then there's deeper levels to that, though. Also, in terms of the most advanced stages of practice. And so, of course, I mean, this particular class, um, is, I wouldn't say necessarily secular because we're still, but it's a little bit more, it's not necessarily rooted in, um, the formal traditional ideas of enlightenment and, to, in that more formal way necessarily. Um, but if we look at traditional historical Buddhist thinking, there is, of course, this idea of fully developing our qualities. And then there's even the idea of looking around us and observing that all other sentient beings suffer just like we do. And so not only living a life of non-harmfulness, but in the most advanced stages of practice, actually feeling a sense of responsibility for helping all sentient beings to fully develop their qualities. Um, and so that's the idea of bodhicitta motivation, the idea of, um, yes, I can fully develop my own qualities, and I that would be an incredibly good use of my life, but that doesn't go far enough. I also need to think about the purpose of that being in order to help all other sentient beings be free of their uh, sufferings, and to help them also achieve the highest possible good. So that goes, I would say that goes even further than just non-harmfulness. That actually is feeling a sense of personal responsibility, which is an incredibly courageous mind, an incredibly brave attitude, where we actually take responsibility for freeing other sentient beings from their suffering. So there's in Buddhist thinking historically, there are a variety of different levels to it. And I think, as you know, I think that in my life too, I think that finding ways of practicing, I think that finding ways of um, practicing that mental training in daily life is also very powerful. So I think that the choices that we make um, can really support that, and that they can really be that, you know, um, a vegan diet, a vegan lifestyle can be an expression of that and can help to reinforce that. I think that's true. Any other thoughts or questions? So, so again, with this, so we've mentioned that we're going to kind of look at these sayings that are in the book, as a sort of touchstone for the material. Maybe these sayings are things that we can end up remembering later on. So next, he's saying, we've talked we talked about meditation and how meditation is, really central to this process of developing our qualities. Um, and so here he's saying that really meditation is a process of introspective awareness, and that it's really a process of looking at our lives, looking at this process of, because we mentioned before, that it's kind of a false way of thinking that there are only two methods, one method being indulging and the other method being suppression. So that, that's kind of a false dichotomy that sometimes people bring up, where they think, well, if Buddhism is saying that I need to think about anger, for example, and we think that, or maybe some Western presentations might suggest that I can either choose to just express my anger by letting it out and express, or I have to bottle it in. And there's this other, Buddhism doesn't really encourage either of those. They don't encourage yelling at people and throwing things, and but they also don't encourage just repression. They encourage awareness and transformation. So that's sort of this idea here, where he's saying that this whole process of trying to recognize trying to recognize the states that give rise to our own suffering and cause suffering for others, is something that we can start to become more familiar with through using meditation as really a scientific exploration of our own mind. And that the more that we do that, the more we see um, that, if we never check in, and we we've talked about before how it's really the light of introspective awareness that allows this process of transformation. Without awareness, there can't be transformation. So if we just ignore these negative mental states, if we just don't acknowledge them, or if we say, oh, well, everybody is like that, or I've always been like that, then, we can go back to what we said last week about how extraordinary the mind is and how it's never too late to start making these changes, and how we can't prejudge that process. We don't know where we will end up if we really start trying. So, in this, he says, um, if we don't check up, if we don't analyze, then there's a danger that we'll just continue to go through the whole rest of our lives thinking that we are all that matter, that our likes and our preferences are the only things that are relevant. Um, but we need to investigate that. We need to argue against that and see, is that true? And does that really bring, is that perspective, is that subconscious way of going through my life, is it really bringing me happiness? Is it really, we feel like, well, I have to look out for myself, and that's the way to my happiness. Buddhism would say, when we start looking out for everyone, that's the way to our happiness, that we're mistaken about how happiness is really achieved. Um, so that's sort of. Oh, you want me to go back to the previous slide? I can do that. So, were you talking just about the last sentence where he says, make the determination that this will be your way of life? So he's just encouraging us he suggests reciting this every morning, like before we get out of bed. Reciting this motivation, and then deciding that will be the way of our life.
Yes. Thank you.
Of course. Sorry, on my screen, sometimes there's a little bit of difference in the way that it actually ends up looking on Zoom, and the way that it looks in OBS. So sometimes things get cut off. Sorry about that.
We can read this. I can read the screen very well. It's big enough. The type is great.
So, what he's saying here is that, what we if we really start to, and so love, of course, genuine love. So now we're going to start looking at the difference between genuine love and attachment. Um, so the Buddhist definition of the word love is the wish for oneself and all other sentient beings to be free, or to have happiness, and the causes of happiness. And compassion is the wish for oneself and all other sentient beings to be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. So what he is asserting here, is that if we develop and if we grow the seed of genuine love, then we will conquer internal and external enemies. Because what is an enemy? An enemy is something that we are labeling as an obstacle. something that we are labeling as being at cross purposes with our agenda. Um, and so, if our agenda is the aspiration for all sentient beings to be happy and to have the causes of happiness, then there really isn't anything that can get in the way of then, when people harm, then if someone is acting in a way that we feel like is at cross purposes with us, then we try to think, well, you know, that is probably because they don't, that they are suffering in some way, that they wouldn't be acting in this harmful way unless they had developed some really mistaken view about how to go about their life. And so if we just respond to that with, well, I deeply wish that they be happy, may they be happy, may by their meeting me, may that cause them to be happy, may they be able to transform their minds in the future, may they be able to develop the real internal qualities that will lead them out of their suffering. If we really can start to think about, and of course, that kind of process, like all of these processes, is a gradual one. We can't transform intense situations right now, but we can transform really minor situations, you know, small inconveniences. And by doing that, over time, we get more skillful, and these ways of thinking become more ingrained, more second nature, and then it will become easier and easier to be able to respond in those more and more challenging circumstances. Um, but ultimately, what is needed is just the aspiration for all sentient beings to genuinely be happy and to genuinely have the causes of happiness. Um, Whereas we think, you know, what we need is to be thick skinned and to be, looking out for ourselves. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So, of course, this is what will be. It's true. It's true, of course, that um, I think it's very much the case that it can feel like in meditation, it can feel very easy to um, when we think about all sentient beings, when we think about, just this kind of nebulous concept of all sentient beings, we can feel very warm-hearted in meditation for 10 or 15, minutes. But it is the people that have known us the longest, the people in our family, and that they really know how to push our buttons. And we have patterns and tendencies with them that maybe even stem from childhood, before had any real skills to. So there isn't a quick, and so those, of course, there's everybody, I think, finds that there's sort of this duality or dichotomy where we can feel very warm-hearted when we just think about each and every sentient being without really looking at particulars, without really thinking about individual people. Um, but we do have to actually look at individual people also, and not just think about it in this very, very broad way. So what Buddhism would suggest, of course, is that to a degree, this is a skill. Like all of these things, this is just a familiarity. This is just a skill. And so the extent to which we develop the skill over time will be what allows for this to unfold. And we have to be patient and reasonable and realistic and recognize that we may have been wounded in, you know, in particular relationships over long periods of time. And that is naturally going to be more difficult to transform than other situations. That it's not going to happen overnight, it's not going to happen quickly. But the general approach is um, to really to do the friend, enemy, and stranger meditation um, in a way. So we start by thinking of someone for whom we naturally and spontaneously have deep, warm hearted, affectionate, loving kindness for. And we really stabilize. And that can even be like a pet, that could even, or it could be a child, or we use whatever we need to use to really create that subjective internal experience for ourselves. And then we really try to stabilize that in the mind in a subjective, visceral, direct, experiential way. When we feel it like that, we move on. We could, if you wanted to, you could go directly to someone then that you're struggling with. Um, and then try to recognize that this person is the same as whomever it was you were thinking about previously. They are the same in wanting to be free of all suffering and wanting to have happiness in it and its causes. There's no difference between the person that you struggle with and the person that you naturally, spontaneously are warm hearted toward with respect to that. So then you just simply try to cause yourself to remember what it's like to feel that way. And then you try to extend that feeling toward the person to whom you have a more difficult relationship with. And then there's other, I mean, of course, there's a lot of different variations of that. You could, some people prefer to do um, more like what they would call loving kindness, that sort of more like the friend, enemy, and stranger meditation. So in that meditation, that would be the enemy, which, and so you could also include a stranger, because ultimately we want to grow this to include all sentient beings if we can. So we try to also think about people that we regard more neutrally rather than, so that would be like the stranger. Um, Metta meditation or loving kindness meditation is another variation where you try to you try to visualize that person, and then you might just try to think about what kinds of phrases generate warm-heartedness. So you might say to yourself, may you be happy, may you be at ease, may you be content, may you be free of suffering. Um, and you just try to think those thoughts as you visualize this person in front of you. Um, and then, of course, I wouldn't, I'm also not discounting other other non-Buddhist approaches too, like therapy, and what Buddhism, all of what historical Buddhism focuses on is internal, um, state changes. They really don't, there really isn't or aren't mechanisms or teachings in terms of like going to the person and trying to heal that. That's, it's really just sort of not the traditional Buddhist approach. So I'm not discounting in any way other kinds of more therapeutic approaches or interpersonal approaches. Those I think are also valid and could be very, very useful. They're not they're not the historical Buddhist view, because the historical Buddhist view really is trying to get to a place where we equally embrace all sentient beings this way.
Mhm.
So it's much broader and much more global in that sense.
Mhm.
So
Losang, I'm relating to what you're saying because meditation or right thought, there could be a huge gap between that and right action. So if this family member or person seriously puts you in harm or makes you suffer, then right action versus right thought might be different, correct?
yeah, so what we're really talking about here isn't, you know, the 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 view that I, if I can't handle, being around this person, or if for my own mind I don't feel safe, or I'm just not prepared, then we may need to have a sense of separation. What we're really trying to work with is being able to do that without a sense of animosity, without a sense of, wishing them harm or wishing. It's just recognizing that for my own mind, I may need to step back. I may need to create separation. Um, but as I'm doing that, I'm hopeful that they transform their mind and that they overcome whatever negativity is present. Um, you know, and Buddhism would say that, that those that, of course, we've talked about boundaries before, and how some boundaries, like the boundary that we all kind of have, the boundary that we wouldn't express it, but the fact that we get frustrated in traffic means that we kind of have a boundary. Well, I should be able to get to work without any traffic. If we didn't have that boundary, we wouldn't get frustrated in traffic, right? If we That's an unreasonable boundary. So working with that is different than saying I don't want to be verbally abused or physically abused. That's also a boundary, but it's completely reasonable. But enlightened beings probably don't even have that boundary. So of course, I think we've mentioned, so that's really just to say that over long periods of time, we might be able to hold in our mind the idea that that my boundaries aren't fixed, that my boundaries can shift in dependence upon how lightly I'm able to hold my conception of myself. But we don't want to do that in an unskillful way where we open ourselves up to abuse or that sort of thing. It's just to kind of have in the back of our mind the awareness that at some point, maybe not in this life, but at some point, I can progress beyond even these boundaries that, um, and at that point, enlightened beings enforce boundaries to prevent other people from creating negative karma. Like that's why they would enforce a boundary, is out of love and compassion for the person creating the harm, because they don't receive harm. They're not capable of being harmed. But we are ordinary beings, and we're absolutely capable of being harmed. Um, so I have a mental problem where I just have to say everything that I think I know about. I don't have a filter. So I'm just trying to help people. I just We could maybe keep in mind that at some point, you know, we should enforce boundaries that are reasonable. Absolutely, we can start with that, and then just try to have the idea that all of these boundaries can be shifted when I'm much more advanced later on. Yes. So Tonglen is also another. So meditation, friend, enemy, and stranger meditation, and also Tonglen. I was gonna. So we could visualize the suffering that that difficult person is experiencing, and then try to visualize taking on that suffering and giving away. That's a very, very advanced meditation practice to do with regard to anyone, but it's also incredibly powerful. And to maybe start working with that again. With all of these things, we need to start slow and build up. So we start with people that agitate us a little bit before we think about doing, the person that we have really complicated deep. So all of these things we try to be skillful and ramp up over time. So again, this is exactly what he's saying. Universal love grows slowly, steadily, and gradually. So what I was saying about attachment and genuine love being, different is that attachment asks the question, what is this with regard to relationships? It asks the question, what is this person doing for me? Whereas genuine love asks the question, what am I able to do for this person? What can I bring to this interaction that is trying to help them to have happiness and the causes of happiness? Um, what, and this also is dealing with one aspect of being unreasonable in a way is that we always expect everyone that we know to never get frustrated with us, to never be short with us, to never snap at us. Of course, we should expect that they don't hit us, that they don't, you know, be verbally abusive. But everybody has a bad day where they say the wrong thing, they use the wrong word, you know, they're short tempered. Um, but the extent to which we need them to never have a bad day, to never be short tempered, to never, that's more so the energy of attachment. And that's unreasonable. Whereas genuine love would recognize that I want to share my life with this person in to whatever degree, whether it's a friendship or a marriage, or, I want to be in this together with this person and I enjoy spending time, but I don't need them to always be saying things that please me, doing things that please me. I recognize that they're a complete person and that they struggle with things, and that I'm not the center of the universe. And so when they have a bad day, it's not the end of the world. And so it's about looking at them in their totality and not freaking out when they're not always able to fulfill our more egocentric needs. So, um, this is again what Lama Yeshe is encouraging here is to really really to embrace our potential to progress beyond that limited way of relating, the way of relating where we're primarily focused on wanting to be taken care of and thinking that, just my circle of close friends and family, and that those are the important people, and that everybody else is a stranger, except for the ones that I feel like are working against me. Those are the enemies. And so putting all sentient beings into those conceptual categories of friend, enemy, and stranger is he's saying that like that's kind of being obsessed with. He's I think he's used Adam maybe in this class, or I can't remember, but maybe before we talked about how he uses, he's kind of meaning that in terms of having this very, very narrow circle of concern, and everything that lies outside of that circle of concern is irrelevant. He's saying that it it will that our potential is so much broader than that, that we can cultivate a mind that goes beyond that. And that when we do that, we're really living up to our potential, instead of thinking, well, if you treat me nicely, then I will treat you nicely. If you don't, then I'm not interested, or I will even perhaps even want to harm you in some way. Um, he's saying that that's such a limited perspective, and that we can develop the mind that progresses out of that. That we're not stuck. It's very common, it's not but we are not, if we choose to be, we're not stuck with that. We can train the mind gradually, slowly, over time, to have a broader, wider view. Um, so then, so here he's talking, so this wider, broader view are these ideas of equilibrium and spaciousness. Um, and so, as I was saying, before, we can sometimes have, in when we're not challenged, when we're just on the cushion, you know, we can feel a sense of oneness, connectedness, spaciousness. Um, but then when someone's yelling at us, when there is traffic, that's when we ha- that's really when we need to be thinking about recollecting and really reminding ourselves of what we're learning, what we are exposing ourselves to in meditation, what we're cultivating, and really trying in daily life. It's not just that practice is half an hour of study or meditation, that half an hour of study or meditation, if it's repeated day after day after day, its purpose is to generate a familiarity that informs how we respond to being yelled at, how we respond to being cut off in traffic. So, but of course, meditation is still study, and meditation is still the vehicle through which success in that daily life scenario is really achieved. But we should never just be satisfied with the meditation, the study. We always, as we're going about our day, we always want to be trying to going back to what we meditated on, what we studied, and thinking about how does this apply in this scenario? How, if I really understood the topic that I studied, how would that wisdom inform how I should think about or how I should react to what's happening in this traffic jam or with this person or whatever it might be? And that's ultimately the point, is that we're trying to suffuse the mind with these more focused periods of meditation and study, but only because when we're not studying and meditating, that familiarity will actually help us in daily life. So, I get, well, any thoughts or questions so far? Oh, okay, good. Yeah, go ahead. Did you have, you can unmute, everybody I think can unmute themselves, or if you had, um,
Yeah,
Mhm.
I know it's possible for things to start growing stronger, these qualities that we want, but sometimes I don't know, sometimes it's hard to know. It's hard to know that you are making progress in that. Sometimes I feel like what I see are the deficits, the places in which um, I'm aggravated a little bit with somebody, and I'm kind of wanting to avoid them because of that. And I think that's not a very strong way to respond. Um, but maybe it's better than saying the wrong thing, um, you know. But it seems like it's really hard to know when you're making any progress along this pathway of having a genuine love for all beings.
Yeah. Um, I think that, of course, we can't really look for progress over very short periods of time. His Holiness, and they would say, try to think back, five, if a person has been, say, meditating for 5 years, so then try to look back, 6 years ago, and maybe over 6 years, try to see if there are some changes, you know. But don't think that, well, if I've been doing it for a month or 2 months or a year, that's certainly not long enough. But, to, so in a way, we kind of have to, we don't have to, but, in a way, it's about trusting the process. Taking the process seriously, of course, is important. So, trying to get to a place where we're meditating maybe once a day and then twice a day. And if we can do more than twice, that's great. But a lot of people, probably twice is what's manageable. Um, and maybe a little bit more on the weekends. Could be 3 times on the weekends. Um, and then, as long Buddhism would really say, as long as we've started to really take it seriously, um, and then we give it several years, and then we look back. If at that point we still don't see any progress, then maybe we should talk to Buddhism. Would then say, well, okay, maybe talk to people who've known me, for that many years, and see if if they've noticed a difference. Maybe talk to your spiritual, if you have a spiritual teacher or guide, um, you know, and see, because we're not always necessarily good at, sometimes a lot of times people, I think people have a much easier time observing their own faults than observing their own good qualities. That certainly, that could be an issue that many people struggle with. Um, but but then, yeah, I think there may come a, if we do feel like there really has been absolutely no progress over 5 or 6 years, um, then we have to maybe try to talk with a spiritual guide or someone, and talk to them about what we've done, how it's gone, and then try to get maybe some feedback, um, and see. But I think that probably most of the time, I think people are just being harder on themselves than you know, is necessary or is called for.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
But we're out of time. At least you had a question. You're muted.
I just, if I could, I wanted to respond. MJ, I just wanted to say I appreciated your realization that sometimes it's better to say nothing, that the right action is no action. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. Often I would say.
All right. Well,
As
I
the
appreciate everyone's coming, and a happy Losar for people
Thank
who
Sorry,
you.
happy
Thank
Yeah,
Losar.
you.
and to you.
wonderful to be here with on Losar with everyone. So we'll just dedicate. So we recollect our virtuous motivation at the beginning. We recollect the efforts that we've put into actualizing that motivation. We just have a sense of offering that effort for the benefit of all sentient beings without exception, letting it go, not clinging to it. Thinking, may it ripen in whatever way is best to support me on my spiritual journey and growth and development. May it ripen in whatever way is best to support all sentient beings, to protect them from suffering, and to install them in a state beyond suffering. All right. Well, have a lovely day and hope to see
Thank
everybody
you.
next week.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Venerable Dondrub. Thank you so much.
Thank